It began with the lights. Cold, sharp December air cut through the barracks like a blade, but we were used to it. England had a way of seeping into your bones, the dampness, the fog. I was stationed at RAF Woodbridge, far enough from anything that resembled civilization, but close enough to feel the distant hum of its presence. The lights, though, they weren't from civilization. They were something else. It was the dead of night, and I was on a routine patrol. Just another mindless shift. The forest bordering the base stretched out in the distance like a shadow, dark and uninviting. Rendlesham, they called it. Rumor had it there were things in that forest, things that couldn't be explained. But rumors were just that, whispers of bored men trying to pass the time. Until the lights came. A bright, pulsating glow cut through the trees like the stroke of a painter's brush. A sudden sweep of unnatural illumination. It wasn't a helicopter or aircraft. There was no sound, no roar of engines, just the eerie hum of something I couldn't put my finger on. At first it felt like an illusion, like the mind playing tricks in the cold. But then the radio crackled to life. "Do you see it?" A voice crackled through the static. I gripped the radio, my pulse quickening. "Yeah," I whispered. "I see it." Orders came swiftly. We were to investigate. Protocol demanded it, though every fiber in my being told me to stay back. Rendlesham Forest wasn't a place to wander at night, but orders were orders, and curiosity was a beast of its own. A small team assembled, 3 of us. We grabbed our flashlights, weapons, though deep down we knew none of it would matter. There was something about the air that night, a charge like before a thunderstorm, but no clouds, no wind. Just an ominous stillness as we crossed the perimeter and entered the forest. The lights were closer now, more vivid, more wrong. I could feel it in my teeth, a buzzing like electricity in the air. My breath clouded in front of me, but the forest was unnaturally warm. "Do you hear that?" one of the others asked, his voice barely audible. There was no sound, not even the usual chirps of night creatures or the rustle of leaves. Just silence until there wasn't. Something shifted in the trees, a quick flicker of movement just beyond the reach of our flashlights. I stopped cold. My heart pounded in my ears. The beam of my flashlight swept across the forest floor, catching nothing but the gnarled roots of trees, until it caught something else. Footprints. Not human, not animal. Something else. "What the hell?" I muttered, crouching down to get a closer look. The prints were deep, almost burned into the earth, clawed, like some creature had passed through. My fingers traced the edges, and my skin prickled as though the very ground itself was repelling me. The lights were stronger now, pulsating, breathing in time with the forest. We pressed on, though something gnawed at the back of my mind, like we weren't supposed to be here. I thought I saw movement again, a shadow darting between the trees. A trick of the light? My imagination? No, I wasn't imagining it. Suddenly, a crack, like a branch snapping underfoot, echoed through the forest. The sound tore through the silence like a gunshot, and we all stopped dead in our tracks. My flashlight flickered, once, twice, before plunging us into darkness. "Shit!" one of the men cursed, fumbling with his light. Then, a noise. It wasn't the sound of something moving, it was the sound of something breathing. Deep, guttural, as if the air itself had come alive. We turned, frantically scanning the forest with our failing beams. The lights ahead of us brightened, as if responding to our presence. And then we saw it. A shape humanoid but wrong. It stood just at the edge of the clearing where the lights danced, bathed in the eerie glow. Its body was elongated, too tall for a man, too thin. And its face... God. Its face was like a hollowed-out mask, with eyes that weren't eyes, just black voids that seemed to swallow the light. It looked at us and time seemed to slow. One of the men raised his weapon, hands trembling. "Don't," I whispered. "Don't move!" But it was too late. The thing moved faster than I could process, a blur of motion. There was a scream, not from the creature, but from one of us, cut short by a sickening crunch. Blood sprayed the trees like red mist, and I felt something wet splatter across my face. I didn't even realize I was screaming until I felt the hoarseness in my throat. The light around us surged, blinding, searing. And then... darkness. I woke up on the ground alone. My head throbbed, and when I tried to move, my limbs felt sluggish, heavy. The lights were gone, the forest was quiet. But something was wrong. I stood stumbling, my mind spinning. Where were the others? Where had it gone? I reached for my radio, but the static buzzed in my ear like 1,000 angry bees. Then I saw the time. My watch. 2 hours had passed. I hadn't moved. The forest was no longer silent. A low hum vibrated beneath the earth, a pulse, almost like a heartbeat. I looked back at the path, the spot where the blood had sprayed, where my team had been only moments before. There was nothing. No blood, no prints, no sign that anyone had ever been there. Except for one thing. My radio crackled back to life, but it wasn't static. It was a voice, one I recognized, but not in the way you'd expect. It was me. "Do you see it?" the voice said. The words I had spoken, looping back to me, twisted, distorted. Then the radio cut off, leaving me alone with the forest, and the cold certainty that whatever had happened was far from over. The next day I tried to piece it all together, but it didn't make sense. None of it did. The others? Gone. Vanished. Their bunks were empty, their gear untouched. No reports. No searches. Nothing. It was as if they had never existed. I wanted to speak up, to report what I'd seen, or thought I'd seen, but something stopped me. Fear, maybe, or something deeper. Something that whispered in the back of my mind, telling me that nobody would believe me. And worse, that maybe I didn't believe myself. Maybe it had been a dream, a nightmare twisted by exhaustion. But the blood, I couldn't forget the blood. The day stretched into night, and when darkness fell again, I found myself staring at the edge of the forest. Rendlesham, still quiet, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every sound, every creak in the barracks made my skin crawl. Then the lights came back. It started the same way. A flicker, barely there at first, just beyond the tree line. But this time I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my gear and headed straight for it, drawn in as if the forest itself was calling me. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts as I crossed into the trees. The air was different tonight, thicker, heavier, like walking through syrup. The light pulsed ahead, flickering, growing brighter with each step I took. I reached the clearing where I had seen the thing the night before, my flashlight beam cutting through the dark like a blade. But the clearing wasn't empty. I wasn't alone. Something was there, crouched in the shadows, its back turned to me. It was hunched over, its long, thin arms reaching into the earth as if it were digging. The same wrongness that I'd felt the night before washed over me, stronger now, almost overwhelming. My gut screamed for me to turn back, to run, but my feet wouldn't listen. "Hey!" I called out before I could stop myself. The thing froze, and for a moment the entire forest seemed to go silent, like the world itself was holding its breath. Slowly it turned. The face was the same, that hollowed-out mask-like face, but now I could see it up close. The skin, if you could call it that, was pale and stretched too tight across its bones, if it even had bones. And the eyes, those black, empty voids, locked onto me. There was no emotion there, no recognition, just a cold, calculating emptiness. Then it stood. It rose to its full height, impossibly tall, towering over me. Its movements were slow, deliberate, as if it knew there was no rush. I stumbled back, my heart slamming against my ribcage, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. My flashlight flickered, the beam sputtering in and out as the thing took a step toward me. My radio crackled. At first it was static, but then, through the hiss, I heard it again. My voice. But not just from the radio. It echoed through the trees surrounding me, closing in. The words I'd spoken the night before twisted and distorted, bouncing back at me like some kind of cruel mockery. "Do you see it?" my voice asked, a low, guttural growl. I froze. My mind raced. The thing stepped closer, and the air around me grew colder, thicker. The lights were pulsating faster now, the glow illuminating the clearing in harsh, unnatural flashes. And then, the ground shifted. It happened so fast I barely had time to react. The earth beneath my feet gave way, opening up like a mouth, swallowing me whole. I fell, tumbling through the darkness, my hands grasping at nothing. The fall seemed endless, my stomach lurching as I plummeted deeper and deeper into the black void below. When I hit the ground, the impact knocked the air from my lungs, pain shooting through my body. I lay there gasping, my head spinning, the darkness pressing in on all sides. Above me, the lights flickered, distant now, like a memory I couldn't quite reach. I tried to stand, but something was wrong. My legs wouldn't work. Panic surged through me, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. I reached down, my hands trembling, and that's when I felt it. The ground, it wasn't ground. It was soft, wet, cold. I looked down, my flashlight beam flickering weakly across the surface beneath me. It was flesh, pale, mottled flesh, stretching out in every direction, pulsating like the walls of a living thing. And then I heard it, a heartbeat, slow, rhythmic, in time with the lights above. I scrambled back, my hands slipping in the slick, wet surface, but there was nowhere to go. The flesh beneath me began to move, shifting, contracting, pulling me deeper. I screamed, clawing at the walls, but it was no use. The flesh was alive, and it was pulling me under. Then from the darkness above, I heard it. A voice. Not mine this time, but something else. Something ancient. Something hungry. "Welcome," it whispered, the word echoing through the chamber like the toll of a bell. And then the lights went out. When I woke up, I couldn't tell how much time had passed. The darkness was thick, almost suffocating, pressing in on me from all sides. My limbs were heavy, as though the weight of the air itself was crushing me. My mind was a blur, trying to reconcile what had happened, trying to understand what I had just seen, or felt. I was underground. That much was clear. But where? How deep? The air was cold, damp, and reeked of something foul, like decaying meat. I forced myself to move, my muscles protesting with each motion as I crawled forward, feeling my way through the darkness. My hands scraped against the soft, fleshy surface beneath me, and I swallowed back the rising bile in my throat. The heartbeat. I could still hear it, slow and steady, echoing through the walls. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was in me, pulsing through my veins, pounding in my skull. Whatever this place was, it was alive. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking as I clicked it on. The beam flickered weakly before settling into a dim yellow light. I could see now, just barely, and what I saw made my stomach turn. The walls weren't just flesh. They were stitched. Hundreds, maybe thousands of pieces, sewn together in a grotesque patchwork of skin and muscle, stretching endlessly in all directions. Some pieces were old, leathery, while others were fresh, still oozing with blood. Faces. I could see faces, twisted and contorted, their mouths frozen in silent screams, their eyes wide with terror. I staggered back, barely able to keep from vomiting. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be real. My mind was playing tricks on me, had to be. But the smell, the slick wetness on my hands, the sensation of the ground breathing beneath me, it was too real. I moved forward, my flashlight flickering again as I navigated through the tunnel. There had to be a way out. Had to be. But the further I went, the more the walls seemed to close in, the passage narrowing, the heartbeat growing louder, faster, until it was almost deafening. And then, in the distance, I saw it. A light. Not the same cold, pulsating light from the forest. This was different. Warm, flickering, like fire. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in time with the rhythm of the place. As I got closer, I could make out the shape of a doorway, an arch carved into the flesh, leading into another chamber. I stepped through, my breath catching in my throat. The chamber was enormous, larger than any room I'd ever seen. The walls curved upward, disappearing into the darkness above, and the floor was covered in the same grotesque patchwork of flesh. But in the center stood something that made my blood run cold. It was a tree, or at least it looked like a tree. Twisted, blackened branches reached out in all directions, but instead of leaves, there were bodies. Dozens of them, hanging like ripe fruit, their skin stretched taut, their faces twisted in agony. The roots of the tree were buried deep into the fleshy floor, pulsing with the same rhythm as the heartbeat. At the base of the tree, something moved. I froze, my flashlight beam trembling as it settled on the figure. It was hunched over, its back to me, just like the creature I'd seen in the forest. But this one was different. Smaller. Human, maybe. It wore a tattered uniform, military, but its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its hair hung in clumps. I took a step forward, my boots squelching in the wetness beneath me. The figure twitched, as if it had heard me. Slowly, it turned, and my heart stopped. It was one of my men, or what was left of him. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, his skin stretched tight over his bones. His mouth hung open, slack, but his eyes were wide with fear. Recognition flickered in them just for a moment before they glazed over with something else. Something inhuman. I stumbled back, my mind racing. This wasn't possible. He'd been taken, killed by that thing in the forest. I'd seen it. I'd heard his scream, but here he was, alive, if you could call it that. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Just a low, guttural rasp, like the last gasp of a dying man. and then, slowly, he lifted his arm, pointing behind me. I turned. Standing at the edge of the chamber, just beyond the reach of my flashlight, was the thing from the forest. The hollowed-out face, the empty black voids for eyes, watching me, studying me. It didn't move, didn't speak, but I could feel its presence pressing down on me like a weight, suffocating, relentless. Suddenly, the ground beneath me shifted, the flesh pulsing harder, faster, as if the place itself was coming to life. The walls trembled, and the tree, began to move. The bodies hanging from its branches twitched, convulsing as though waking from a long sleep. Their mouths opened in unison, a low, haunting moan filling the chamber. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. All I knew was that I had to get out. My legs burned as I sprinted through the tunnel, the flashlight bouncing wildly in my hand. The heartbeat was everywhere now, pounding in my skull, vibrating through my bones. The walls were closing in, the fleshy surface twisting, reshaping, as though the place itself was trying to trap me. I stumbled, falling hard onto the wet, pulsating floor. Pain shot through my knee, but I forced myself up, my heart racing. I could hear it behind me. The thing, its footsteps slow, deliberate, as it followed me through the darkness. Then up ahead I saw it. Another light. The exit. I pushed myself harder, every muscle screaming in protest. The light grew closer, brighter, until I burst through the tunnel and into the open air. The forest. I was back in the forest, but something was wrong. The air was thick, the trees twisted, warped, as though they had been melted and reshaped by something unnatural. And then I realized I wasn't alone. The figures were there, standing just beyond the tree line, watching me. Dozens of them. Silent. Still. Their faces pale, their eyes wide with that same inhuman emptiness. And behind them, at the edge of the clearing, the lights returned, brighter now, pulsing, alive. The forest wasn't just a place. It was a trap, and I was still inside it. The forest closed in around me, its eerie silence pressing against my skin as the lights flickered once more in the distance. But this time, something was different. Instead of the suffocating dread that had gripped me since I first stepped into Rendlesham, there was a calmness. The pulsing lights ahead still called to me, but they didn't feel menacing. Not anymore. I walked forward cautiously, my breath steady, as if some deep part of me understood that this moment had been coming for a long time. The path beneath my feet was familiar now, like I'd been walking it forever, like I had always been meant to walk it. The trees bent and twisted, but not in the way they had before. They didn't seem to be trapping me, pulling me into some nightmare. Instead, they guided me, leading me toward something I couldn't yet see but could feel growing closer with every step. Ahead, the clearing emerged, the same one I'd stumbled upon before, only now it wasn't shrouded in terror. The tree was still there, blackened and twisted, its roots buried deep into the earth, but something had changed. The bodies that had hung grotesquely from its branches were gone. The air no longer smelled of decay and death. It smelled clean, fresh, like the forest was awakening. And standing at the base of the tree, bathed in the soft, warm light, was the figure. The same hollow-eyed thing that had hunted me, stalked me through the dark, now stood still, its posture relaxed. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't even moving. It just waited, watching me, as if it had been expecting me all along. But this time, instead of fear, I felt a strange sense of recognition. I stepped forward, slowly, cautiously, until I was standing at the edge of the clearing. The light was different now, softer, not the cold, pulsating glow I'd seen before. It felt warm, almost like sunlight breaking through the clouds after a storm. The figure tilted its head, its dark, empty eyes locking onto mine, but there was no malice there, no hunger, just understanding. It took a slow step forward, and though every instinct in my body screamed for me to run, I didn't move. I couldn't. Something in me told me that this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The thing, no, being, came closer, and as it did, I felt something shift inside me. The fear, the terror, the confusion, all of it seemed to melt away, replaced by something I hadn't felt since I first entered the forest. Peace. It stopped a few feet from me, towering over me, its long, thin arms hanging loosely at its sides. It didn't speak, didn't need to. The air between us vibrated with a silent communication, a knowing, and then slowly it reached out, extending one of its arms toward me. I hesitated, but only for a moment. Then, almost instinctively, I lifted my hand and placed it in the creature's. The second our hands touched, a rush of warmth flooded through me, like electricity, but gentle. It wasn't pain. It wasn't fear. It was connection. I could feel the creature's presence in my mind, not as a threat, but as an invitation to understand. And then, in a flash of light, everything changed. The forest around me disappeared, replaced by images, memories, visions. I saw the beings, the ones who had come before us, before this time, before this world. I saw the lights, the same lights I'd chased through the trees, only now I understood what they were. They weren't signals of danger. They were beacons. Beacons of hope, left behind by an ancient race, guardians of this world, protectors of the balance between worlds. I saw the men who had vanished, the ones I'd thought were lost forever. But they weren't gone. They had been rescued, taken into a different realm, a place where time didn't move the same way, where they had been saved from the destruction that awaited those who ignored the signs. And then I saw myself. I wasn't just some soldier on a routine patrol. I was part of this, part of something much bigger than I'd ever imagined. This forest, this place had called to me because it was time. Time for me to understand, to see beyond the fear, beyond the illusion of terror that had clouded my vision. The creature's grip on my hand tightened, not in malice, but in reassurance. The visions faded and the forest returned. But it was different now. Alive, vibrant. The trees, the ground, the air, it all pulsed with life, with energy. And I understood. This place wasn't a trap. It wasn't a prison. It was a sanctuary. The creature, my guide, released my hand and stepped back. The light around us shimmered, growing brighter, warmer, like the dawn of a new day. The figures in the trees, the ones I'd feared, the ones who had haunted my every step, emerged from the shadows, their faces no longer twisted in agony. They were smiling, calm, at peace, and so was I. I stepped forward into the clearing, the weight of the fear, the confusion, the terror lifting from my shoulders. The being, the guardian, watched me, its empty eyes no longer frightening but comforting. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't trapped. I was free. As I walked through the forest, the lights dancing around me, I knew that I had been given something precious. A second chance. A chance to leave this place not with fear but with understanding. The others, those who had come before, had been saved, just as I had. And now, it was time for me to return, to bring that understanding back with me. I crossed the threshold of the forest, the warm glow of the lights fading behind me as I stepped back onto the base. The cold December air hit my face, but it didn't feel so sharp now. It felt clean, fresh. I looked back one last time at the forest, now still, quiet, and understood the truth. The Rendlesham Forest wasn't a place of terror. It was a place of salvation, and I had been chosen to witness it.